On a freezing winter night, a man noticed two wolves standing quietly near the edge of his land. They didn't growl or show their teeth. Instead, they looked desperate, gently scratching at his door like they were begging to come in. When he finally opened that door, he had no idea how much his life was about to change. Why would two wild wolves seek shelter with a human? Why turn away from the wild they belonged to? Warren Pierce had lived in the remote Alaskan wilderness his whole life. He was used to brutal winters, icy winds, and long, dark nights. His log cabin, weathered and sturdy, stood strong after years of facing nature's harshest tests. But even with all his experience, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw that snowy evening. That day had been like most others in winter. Warren had chopped enough firewood to keep the cabin warm and made sure his small greenhouse, heated by a single electric unit, was holding up. As night fell, he settled into his routine, a warm mug of tea, the sound of crackling fire and peace. Then he heard something strange, a soft scratching at the door, followed by quiet whines that pierced the silence. At first, he thought it might be a stray dog, one of the rare feral animals that roamed nearby. But when he peeked through the frosted window, his heartbeat quickened. Two thin wolves stood on his porch, snow clinging to their tangled fur, their breath puffed out in the icy air. Instead of acting aggressive, they trembled, clearly worn out and freezing. One of them let out a weak howl, not a threat, but a cry for help. Warren's instincts clashed with reason. Wolves were wild after all, dangerous, but these didn't seem threatening. They looked pitiful and cold. Against his better judgment, he grabbed a flashlight and slowly cracked the door. The closer of the two wolves stepped forward shakily, its eyes meeting his not with menace but with silent pleading. His fear was quickly replaced by compassion. What could have driven them to seek a human for help? And if he welcomed them in, was he risking his life? He stood in the doorway, the bitter wind biting at his face, as the wolves stared back at him. Snow had piled around them. The air was far below freezing, and they were clearly suffering. Warren hesitated. Logic told him this was a bad idea, inviting predators inside. But as he looked closer, he saw no threat in their eyes, only exhaustion. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door wider and motioned them in. The wolves exchanged a look, or what seemed like one, then cautiously stepped forward, their paws leaving light tracks in the snow. As soon as they entered and felt the cabin's warmth, they both seemed to relax, like they were finally letting go of tension they'd carried for miles. Warren closed the door behind them, sealing out the wind and snow. The wolves stood still for a moment, breathing hard in the sudden quiet. Then they began to explore, noses low, sniffing the furniture and the woodpile. One of them limped slightly, favoring its back leg. Its ribs were clearly visible. The other was bigger, with a scar along its muzzle. Despite how rough they looked, they moved calmly. No panic, no sudden motions. Warren stood nearby, watching them closely. He felt a mix of awe and uncertainty. They were wild animals, yet here they were, walking around his home as if they belonged. He tossed another log into the fire. The flames danced and filled the cabin with a golden glow. The wolves turned toward the warmth, one of them letting out a soft whine as it moved closer. Maybe it was the first time they'd ever felt heat like that. Warren knew what had to come next: food. He went to his small pantry and pulled out some meat he'd planned to cook for himself. He wasn't sure if feeding wolves raw cuts was smart, but they clearly needed it. He placed the meat on a plate and set it on the floor, then backed away. The injured one licked its wrapped leg now and then, and the bigger wolf lifted its head as Warren came in. He set the wood down, added some to the fire, and put out another portion of meat. The wolves approached slowly, still cautious, but accepting. As they ate, Warren sat nearby, watching the snow swirl outside. It struck him how surreal the whole situation was. Two wild animals, comfortably eating and resting in his living room. But instead of fear, he felt something else growing. Connection. Survival had brought them together. Now trust was taking root. The day passed quietly. Warren read an old book. The wolves dozed near the fire, and snow continued to fall. Every so often, he wondered whether he should call someone, a ranger, a wildlife expert. But the thought of the wolves being taken away or even killed if seen as a threat made him hesitate. For now, he chose to wait. That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Warren couldn't sleep. He paced the cabin while the wolves watched him with quiet eyes. He felt their gaze, calm, understanding, and it unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Eventually, he settled in his chair and let the warmth of the fire lull him into sleep. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether the wolves would stay or leave, but he sensed that his world was already changing, and deep down, he wasn't sure he wanted it to go back. The morning sun crept slowly over the snowy hills, casting a soft golden light through the cabin windows. Warren stirred awake. The familiar warmth of the fire nearby and the surprising calm of his unusual guests made it feel like waking from a dream. But reality hit when he noticed something odd. The larger wolf was no longer resting by the fire. His pulse quickened. Had it slipped outside during the night? Could it have wandered into the woods again? Before he could panic, a low growl from the far side of the room drew his attention. The bigger wolf was still inside, standing protectively near its injured companion, its body tense, ears back, eyes fixed on the door. Warren approached slowly, heart pounding. Something had startled the animal. He glanced through the window and saw faint movement at the edge of the trees. Not an animal, but a figure, a human figure. His breath fogged the glass as he tried to get a better look. A person creeping near his cabin in the middle of winter was not just rare, it was unsettling. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, pressing his ear to the door. The wind howled, but there was no sound from the figure. The large wolf growled again, more insistent this time. The smaller one shifted, whining softly. "It's okay," Warren whispered, more to calm himself than the wolves. He cracked the door open, letting in a burst of frigid air. The figure had vanished, but fresh footprints led around the side of the cabin. Stepping outside, Warren followed the tracks cautiously. The snow crunched under his boots, every sound sharp in the stillness. He circled the building, passing the woodpile, when a sudden voice made him freeze. "Are they inside?" a woman's voice asked, low and tense. Warren turned quickly. A woman in a heavy coat stood a few feet away, hood pulled low and scarf covering most of her face. Only her eyes were visible, sharp, worried eyes. He raised his hands slightly. "Who are you?" "I'm tracking those wolves," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "They belong to a nearby pack. They've been missing for days." Warren's heart skipped. "Tracking them," he repeated, unsure whether she was friend or threat. "Not to harm them," she added quickly, seeing his alarm. "I'm with a wildlife rehabilitation group. We've been monitoring that pack, especially those two. The smaller one was injured. They got separated during a storm." Warren still felt cautious, but her concern seemed real. "Why not just come to the door? I didn't know what I'd find," she admitted, glancing at the cabin. "Some people don't take kindly to wolves. I had to be sure." He considered that, then nodded and opened the door wider. "Come inside slowly. They're jumpy." Inside the cabin, the large wolf immediately reacted to the woman's presence, stepping between her and the injured one with a deep bark. The woman moved with care, pulling back her hood to reveal a tired but kind face. She crouched down, palms open in front of her. "Hey there, big guy," she said gently. "It's okay. I'm a friend." Her voice was calm and steady, like someone used to dealing with scared animals. The wolf watched her but didn't advance or retreat. She inched forward. After a long moment, the tension in the wolf's posture softened. "I'm Kara," she said over her shoulder to Warren, field researcher with North Ridge Wildlife Center. She moved to the smaller wolf and examined the bandaged leg. "You did a good job," she said, clearly impressed. "You might have saved its life." Warren shrugged. "I just couldn't leave them out there." Kara explained that the wolves belonged to a pack that had been under observation due to declining numbers in the region. The smaller one, a young female, had likely been injured by a trap or another animal. The larger wolf was her sibling, maybe the only one she had left. The storm had separated them from the rest of the group, and until Kara found Warren's cabin, her team feared they were lost for good. As she spoke, the wolves visibly relaxed. They seemed to recognize her, the way animals do when they sense familiarity. Warren felt both relieved and sad. This meant their time with him might be coming to an end. They would go back to where they belonged, but he'd grown attached in such a short time. "You're taking them with you?" he asked quietly. Kara nodded. "We have a place where we can treat her leg properly. Once they're well, we'll release them." She looked at him with gentle respect. "Only if that's okay with you. There on your land." Warren glanced at the wolves, a heavy feeling in his chest. He didn't want to say goodbye. Not yet, but he knew what was right. "It's what they need, isn't it?" "It is," Kara confirmed softly. "They're wild animals. They need their pack, their freedom." Warren nodded, though it was harder than he expected. "Then let's do what we need to." Kara's presence changed the atmosphere in the cabin. The wolves still watched her carefully, but it was clear they recognized her as someone familiar. Not quite a stranger, and not a threat. Warren felt a similar shift inside himself. She brought answers to the questions he hadn't dared to ask, and a clear direction for what came next. After setting down her bag, Kara knelt beside the injured wolf again, checking the leg with experienced hands. "It's not infected," she said, sounding relieved, "but it'll need proper care. You've done more than most would have managed." Warren stayed quiet, watching her work. He admired the gentle way she handled the animal, always moving slowly, speaking softly. The larger wolf stayed nearby, alert but calm, its eyes flicking between its sibling and the woman. "She must be her sister," Kara murmured. "Wolves form tight family bonds. If one's hurt, the other won't leave her side." Warren nodded. Over the past few days, he'd seen that bond clearly. The bigger wolf constantly guarding the smaller one, sharing warmth, never straying far. As evening approached, Warren suggested they spend one more night in the cabin before trying to move the wolves. Kara agreed. Stress could make things worse, and it would be safer to give them more time to adjust. She proposed easing them into the idea of travel, maybe introducing a carrier slowly or preparing a sled. "I have a snowmobile," Warren said. "We could use it to meet your team if they can't get here." Kara's face lit up. "That would help a lot. My truck's stuck a few miles out. Snow's too deep to drive it here." They spent the next hour planning. Kara would contact her team at dawn and arrange a rendezvous point near a frozen creek. Warren would help with transport. It sounded simple enough, but Warren knew better than to trust the Alaskan wilderness to go easy on them. As night fell, the fire warmed the cabin and cast soft shadows across the walls. The wolves lay side by side, breathing in rhythm. Kara watched them quietly, her expression full of affection. "I've been tracking them for months," she said. "There used to be 6 in their pack. Then we lost their signals during the blizzard. I thought they were gone." Warren poked the fire gently. "Maybe it's a miracle they found their way here." "Maybe," Kara said. "Being separated like that is usually a death sentence, especially for an injured one." They talked for a while. About her work, his life alone in the cabin, the brutal winters. Before bed, Warren fed them again. Kara watched his method with interest, noting how at ease the wolves seemed with him. "You've done something amazing here," she said. "Most wolves would never come this close to a human, let alone walk into their home. But they trust you." Warren gave a quiet shrug, unused to praise. "I couldn't just let them freeze. Maybe you needed them too," Kara said, tilting her head thoughtfully. He looked at her, surprised by the comment. But maybe she was right. Life in the wilderness was lonely. Maybe in a strange way, their desperation had met his own. That night, the wind returned. It howled around the cabin, rattling the windows and causing the old structure to groan. Warren and Kara took turns waking to check on the wolves and the fire. The larger wolf stayed alert, ears twitching at every noise, but relaxed again once it sensed no danger. Morning arrived with pale light and silence. Kara rubbed her eyes and stepped outside with her radio, trying to reach her team. Warren made coffee, the rich smell filling the cabin. The wolves stirred, the smaller one shifting on its bandaged leg, but not whining this time. A small improvement. When Kara came back inside, her face was serious. "They're sending help," she said. 2 of my team members will meet us about 3 miles from here, near the frozen creek." Warren nodded. "Then we'd better get ready." They packed supplies quickly. Warren lined a small sled with blankets for the injured wolf. The larger one, though cautious, sniffed the setup without resistance. Getting the wolves into the sled was the biggest challenge. Warren opened the cabin door, letting in a gust of cold air. Kara moved carefully, guiding the smaller wolf into the sled with soft words and gentle touches. It whimpered, but didn't fight. The larger wolf jumped in after, curling protectively around its sibling. With everything ready, Warren climbed onto the snowmobile and Kara sat behind him, radio in hand. The engine roared to life, and as they pulled away from the cabin, Warren glanced back once. The place that had become a refuge not just for him, but for 2 wild, wounded souls. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew this journey, for them and for him, was far from over. The snowmobile roared across the frozen land, cutting a single track through the untouched white. Warren gripped the handlebars tightly, his eyes focused on the path ahead. Behind him, the sled slid smoothly, carrying the 2 wolves wrapped in blankets. Kara sat just behind him, one hand gripping the edge of the seat, the other holding her radio as they pushed forward through the biting wind. The wolves lay huddled together. The smaller one kept its injured leg tucked close, while the larger one curled around it protectively, as if shielding it from the cold and the world. They didn't resist the movement of the sled, didn't try to leap out. Maybe they understood. This was their chance. Kara leaned in close to speak over the wind. "My team's about an hour out. We just have to stay on course." Warren nodded, weaving around snowdrifts and frozen tree stumps. Every few moments, he checked over his shoulder to make sure the sled was still stable and the wolves weren't in distress. The larger wolf's ears twitched at every sharp turn, but it didn't panic. That small detail gave Warren hope. But 10 minutes into the journey, the sky started to darken. A thick wall of gray clouds rolled in from the west. Snow began falling again. Light at first, then faster, heavier. Warren shouted back, "Storm's coming, pick up the pace," Kara replied, clutching his shoulder. He pushed the snowmobile harder, the engine whining louder as they sped through the deepening snow. The sled bounced more over rough patches, flinging snow up into the air. The wolves whimpered but stayed in place. As the trail narrowed and the trees thickened, Warren slowed again, careful not to risk tipping the sled. Branches heavy with snow drooped low, forcing him to duck and steer around them. Kara checked her GPS. We should be close to the creek. Moments later, they reached a wide, flat stretch of frozen water. The surface was packed with snow, but under it lay solid ice. Warren hesitated at the edge, then slowly guided the snowmobile across. The ice groaned faintly, but it held. The creek stretched like a white path through the wilderness. On the far bank, tree trunks loomed. Kara scanned them carefully. "We're supposed to meet them near a red-marked pine," she said. Just then her radio crackled. "Kara, this is Dan. Storm's moving faster than expected. We might have to set up camp. We're approaching from the east." "We're on the creek now," Kara replied. "Looking for you." Wind whipped across the frozen creek, flinging snow sideways, blurring everything. Warren squinted into the white haze, finally spotting a faint red smear on one of the trees. "There," he pointed. They reached the bank and found a half-assembled camp. 2 figures in winter gear were wrestling with tarps that flapped wildly in the wind. A small fire crackled in a pit, barely staying lit against the gusts. Kara jumped off the snowmobile and waved. The team responded immediately, helping guide the sled toward the shelter. "They're weak but stable," she told them. "The smaller one's injured." Dan, tall with a weathered face and gray in his beard, nodded. "Let's get them inside before the storm buries us." His partner, Nina, already had blankets spread out in the makeshift tent. Together, they gently lifted the wolves out of the sled. The larger one growled as Dan approached, but calmed quickly when Kara spoke softly. The injured wolf trembled from cold and stress but didn't resist. Warren stood back, unsure what to do now. After all the days he had spent with them, handing them over felt strangely hollow. Kara seemed to notice. She turned to him and said quietly, "You've done so much. We're going to take good care of them." Warren nodded, his throat tight. As the team secured the shelter and reinforced it against the storm, the wolves lay side by side, safe for now. The fire burned steadily, casting a warm glow against the canvas wall. The storm might rage outside, but inside there was peace. For the wolves, for the rescuers, and for the man who had let compassion guide him through the cold. The storm pounded against the makeshift shelter, wind screaming through the trees and snow falling in thick, heavy sheets. The camp creaked and groaned under the pressure, but it held, barely. Inside, the 4 humans and 2 wolves huddled close to the fire, wrapped in layers of blankets and urgency. Dan and Nina took turns feeding the fire, using whatever drywood they could find. Kara stayed close to the injured wolf, checking the bandages and monitoring its breathing. The sedative she'd given it had calmed its trembling, and though its leg was still swollen, the bleeding had stopped. The larger wolf remained alert, refusing to lie down until hours into the night. It paced protectively, eyes following every movement. Once in a while, it nudged its sibling gently, letting out soft, anxious sounds. Warren couldn't help but watch them with awe. These weren't just wild animals. They were family, bonded by something deep and unshakable. He sat beside them at one point, his back to one of the shelter's wooden supports. He reached out slowly and touched the larger wolf's side, unsure what to expect. To his surprise, it didn't flinch. In fact, it leaned slightly into his hand. That one quiet moment of trust said more than words ever could. By midnight, the storm was at its worst. Snow piled high around the camp, the walls of the shelter flapping under the weight of the wind. Everyone took shifts keeping the fire going and checking the ropes. It was a fight not just against cold, but against exhaustion. During one of his shifts, Warren noticed the larger wolf acting uneasy again. It circled the smaller one, ears twitching, nose in the air. Though its sibling was deeply asleep, the larger wolf nudged it now and then, almost like it needed reassurance. Warren felt something stir inside him. These animals, so often painted as dangerous and cruel, were showing more loyalty than many people he'd met. He thought back to the night they arrived at his door. Half frozen, desperate yet still together. Eventually, the worst of the storm passed. The wind settled into a steady moan and the snowfall thinned. Dan peered out with a flashlight, scanning the horizon. "It's letting up," he said. "If this holds, we might be able to move again by morning." For the first time in hours, the group allowed themselves a moment to breathe. Warren lay down near the wolves, bone-tired but oddly comforted by their quiet presence. The larger wolf finally curled up beside its sibling and rested its head on its paws. Warren whispered softly, "You're safe now." And for the first time in days, he truly believed it. By dawn, the sky was pale and quiet. Snowdrifts reached waist-height in places, but the worst had passed. Kara checked her radio, hopeful for news from her team clearing the road. Warren stretched his aching limbs and checked on the wolves. They stirred slowly, blinking in the light. The injured one was groggy but better, the swelling reduced slightly. It even managed to lift its head without crying out. Hope had returned to the shelter with the sunrise. But just as things began to feel steady again, Kara's radio crackled to life. "Kara, come in," Dan's voice said, strained. "The road's blocked, trees down, ice everywhere. We're working on it, but it could take hours. Maybe a day," Warren sighed. They were stuck for now. He looked toward the tree line, uneasy. They couldn't move the wolves yet, and staying here too long posed its own risks. But they had no choice. For the sake of the animals, they would wait. As they planned their next steps and restocked the fire, the larger wolf began pacing again. Its nose twitched. Its body tensed. It was sensing something, watching. And that's when Warren saw it too. Something out in the woods. A faint shadow, low to the ground, barely visible against the snow. Another wolf. Warren froze, eyes locked on the tree line. A shape moved behind the snow-covered branches, quick, low to the ground, cautious. It wasn't large, but it wasn't small either. And it wasn't a fox or a coyote. It was a wolf, alone. The larger wolf inside the shelter noticed first. It stood up suddenly, its ears high and tail stiff. It didn't growl, but its entire body focused on that distant movement. The injured wolf lifted its head too, letting out a questioning whine. Nah, crouching beside the wolves, tensed. What spooked them? Kara picked up her binoculars and scanned the trees. There's movement out there, she said. Can't tell what it is yet. Warren's heart pounded. Might be that lone wolf I saw before, he said, stepping toward the opening of the shelter. Just then, the larger wolf barked once sharply, then started limping toward the exit. It looked back at Warren, then toward the trees, torn between two instincts, to protect its injured sibling or to investigate the presence it clearly recognized. Warren quickly stepped in its way, arms raised. Easy, he said calmly. We can't have you running off now. The wolf growled softly, not in anger but in frustration and anxiety. It looked again toward the woods, then back at its sibling, then Warren, as if pleading with him to understand. Kara's radio buzzed again. Urgent update, came Dan's voice. We've spotted another wolf near the road. Looks weak, possibly injured. Heading your way. Warren turned to her immediately. That has to be it, he said. The third one. It's looking for them. Kara frowned. If it's part of their pack, we can't ignore it. But we also can't leave these two alone. I'll go, Warren said without hesitation. You stay here, I'll try to find it. Nina looked skeptical. Alone, that could be dangerous. I won't do anything reckless, Warren promised. I'll follow the tracks. If I find it, I'll bring it back. If not, I'll come straight back here. Kara looked at him, weighing the risks. Finally, she nodded. Keep your radio on. If anything happens, call us. Warren packed quickly, heavy coat, gloves, first aid kit, full fuel tank for his snowmobile. Before he left, he knelt beside the injured wolf and gave it a gentle pat. I'll be back, he whispered. The wolf looked at him, almost as if it understood. The larger wolf let out a long, low howl that echoed into the trees as Warren rode off. Snow whipped against his face as the twilight deepened. He followed the trail toward the road, scanning for any sign of movement. It wasn't long before he spotted it. A flash of gray limping through the trees, barely upright. He cut the engine and stepped off, flashlight in hand. Hey, he called softly, approaching carefully. The wolf turned to face him. It was thinner than the others, bones showing beneath a ragged coat. It growled faintly but didn't flee. It looked ready to collapse. You're not alone, Warren said gently. I know your family. They're safe. Let me help. The wolf took a step back, then stumbled. It collapsed into the snow, breathing shallow, eyes tired but alert. Warren knelt, speaking softly. You're all right now. We've got you. From behind a tree, Dan emerged, rifle lowered. I followed your signal, he said. We'll get it back together. The wolf didn't resist as they gently wrapped it in a blanket and lifted it onto the sled. Its strength was gone, but its eyes held a flicker of hope. Warren and Dan rode back toward the shelter, the cold wind biting but their spirits rising. This lone, starving wolf wasn't just a stray. It was the missing piece of a broken family, and they were about to bring it home. As the snowmobiles pulled up to the shelter, the sky had turned a deep lavender, streaked with orange. A rare calm after the storm. Kara and Nina rushed to meet them, eyes widening when they saw the third wolf wrapped in a blanket on the sled. You found it, Kara said in disbelief, her voice full of relief. Warren nodded as he stepped off his snowmobile. Barely. It was close to collapse. They carefully brought the wolf into the shelter. Inside, the two others stirred immediately. The larger wolf's ears perked up, its entire body suddenly alert. The injured one, though weak, tried to lift itself. Easy, Kara whispered, moving to position herself between the wolves in case things got tense. They didn't know how this reunion would go. Wolves had strong social structures. Sometimes even family could be rejected under stress or injury. But what happened next stunned them all. The third wolf, though barely able to move, raised its head and let out a soft, pleading whine. The larger wolf stood, tail low, ears back, and cautiously stepped forward. The tension melted from its body. It sniffed the newcomer, let out a quiet huff, then nuzzled its muzzle gently. They know each other, Nina whispered. They're family. The injured wolf let out a soft whimper, pulling itself up slightly as the third wolf hobbled closer. The three wolves circled each other, sniffing, whining, touching noses. No growling, no fear, just recognition and relief. It was as if the missing piece of their world had fallen into place. Warren stepped back to give them space. His eyes stung unexpectedly. To witness such a raw, quiet moment of reunion, of survival, was more moving than anything he could have imagined. Kara smiled beside him. They're whole again," she said softly. "You did that." Warren didn't respond. He just nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. They lay down as a single unit now, touching at the shoulders, noses resting on each other's sides. Kara's radio crackled again. "This is Dan," came a voice. "We've cleared a path. We'll be there in about 20 minutes with the truck." Everyone in the shelter snapped into motion. This was their chance to get the wolves to proper care. Nina began preparing light sedatives, just enough to keep the animals calm during transport. Kara checked the crates. Warren offered to help load them, though the thought of saying goodbye made his chest tighten. When Dan and his team arrived, headlights cutting through the snow, they moved quickly. The crates were large and padded. Kara spoke in low, reassuring tones as the wolves were gently coaxed in, one by one. The third wolf resisted a bit, but with care and patience, they settled it inside. Even in separate crates, the wolves could see each other through the mesh. Their eyes stayed connected, calm and steady. Not frightened, but trusting. Warren stood in the snow beside the truck, watching them being secured. He felt pride, relief, and something that almost felt like heartbreak. "You can visit them," Kara said beside him. "Once they're healed, and when we release them, if you'd like, you can be there." Warren nodded, voice thick. "Yeah, I'd like that." The truck's engine growled to life, snow crunched beneath its tires as it began its slow, careful path back to civilization. Warren stood watching until the taillights disappeared into the trees. The wind had gone still. The cold felt softer, and in the quiet that followed, he whispered, "Goodbye," imagining the wolves' breath rising in the cold air, hearts beating together as they journeyed back toward freedom. As the snow settled and the truck disappeared down the trail, Warren remained standing for a long moment, his breath misting in the frosty air. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything he had witnessed, everything he had felt. The wolves were gone now, but something lingered. Not just their scent or their warmth, but the presence of what they'd brought into his life. Purpose, connection, and an unspoken bond he hadn't realized he was missing. The shelter felt strangely quiet after the rush of the last few days. Gone were the soft whines, the watchful eyes, the cautious movements near the fire. What remained was the steady crackle of the flames and the deep quiet of the Alaskan wilderness settling back in. Kara stood beside him, her gear packed, her expression calm but tired. "They'll be safe now," she said gently. "We'll monitor them, treat the injuries, let them rest. Once they're strong enough, we'll find a time and place to release them, somewhere familiar, somewhere they can thrive." Warren gave a small nod. "You'll let me know when that happens." "Of course," she replied with a warm smile. "You're part of their story now." That night, back in his cabin, the quiet felt different. Not lonely, just still. He moved through the room slowly, noticing things he hadn't before. The fur caught in the blankets, the faint paw prints by the door, the scent of wildness that still clung to the walls. He didn't rush to clean it up. It felt like something sacred. Over the next few days, life settled back into its usual rhythm. Warren chopped wood, checked his greenhouse, cooked simple meals, and watched the snowfall from his porch. But every small task felt changed, a little more meaningful, a little more aware. True to her word, Kara kept in touch. She sent updates from the Wildlife Center. Photos of the wolves resting in a large open enclosure. The small one's leg was healing well. The third wolf, once on the brink of collapse, had started gaining weight and moving more confident. Most importantly, the three remained inseparable, a bonded trio surviving together. One picture showed them lying in the snow, eyes half closed, touching shoulders just like they had in the shelter. Another showed the younger wolf playfully tugging at a strip of bark, while the larger one watched over her. Each image brought a tug to Warren's heart. Not sadness exactly, just something deep and real, like looking at old friends and remembering a moment you'll never forget. Weeks passed. Then one day, a message came from Kara. They're ready. She invited him to join the release. A remote valley had been chosen, far from people, but close to where the wolves had originally been tracked. The location was ideal, vast, wild, and rich with prey. A place where they could reclaim their life in the wild. Warren agreed immediately. When the day came, he rode out with the team. Snow crunched underfoot, and the sky was pale and clear. As they set up the crates, Warren stood a little apart, heart pounding with anticipation. One by one, the wolves were let out. The large male stepped out first, sniffing the air, eyes sharp. Then came the injured female, now fully healed, her limp nearly gone. Finally, the third wolf, the last to be rescued, bounded out not weak anymore, but full of life. For a moment, they stood still, taking it all in. Then, as if by silent agreement, they turned toward the forest and began to trot into the trees. Warren watched until their shapes melted into the snow-covered wilderness, until there was nothing left but paw prints fading into white. Just before they vanished, the largest wolf turned back. Only for a second, but enough. Warren met its gaze, steady, quiet, full of understanding. Then it was gone. He let out a slow breath, feeling something settle in his chest. Not loss, not regret, just peace. He'd done what he could, and that somehow was enough. In the days that followed, Warren returned to his quiet life in the cabin. The silence didn't bother him now. It felt earned, like the woods were giving him space to reflect. No longer was he simply passing time in the wilderness. Now he felt part of it, connected to it in a way he hadn't before. He found himself remembering small details. The way the smaller wolf had pressed her nose into the blanket, the soft sounds of breathing as they slept near the fire, the watchful glint in the older one's eyes. These memories surfaced often, uninvited but welcome, like echoes from a brief and powerful bond that had marked him deeply. Kara kept her promise. She sent updates from time to time, reports on how the wolves were doing in the wild, where their trackers placed them, how they were moving together through the snow-covered terrain. She even shared that the three had begun to integrate back with a larger group. They were adapting, thriving. That knowledge filled Warren with quiet joy. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the snow in warm tones, Warren sat on his porch with a mug of tea in hand. He stared out at the woods, at the endless stretch of white and shadow and silence. Somewhere out there, his wolves, because that's how he thought of them now, were running free. He thought of the moment they'd stood on his porch, desperate and cold. The decision to let them in had been instinctive. Risky, yes, but not reckless. It had been the right thing to do. That moment of compassion had led to something extraordinary, and in a way, they had rescued him too. Living alone in the wilderness had hardened Warren over the years, made him quiet, cautious, a man of habit and survival. But the wolves reminded him that survival wasn't just about getting through the cold. It was about connection, about recognizing when to let something wild and uncertain into your life and trusting that it might bring warmth. Before heading back inside, he glanced at the fireplace through the window. An extra stack of blankets still sat near it. He hadn't moved them. He didn't need to. Not every winter brings wolves to your door. But if it happens again, Warren Pierce knew exactly what he'd do, because kindness, once given, doesn't just save others. Sometimes it saves you too. The fire crackled softly as Warren watched the two wolves settle near the hearth. They lay close to each other, their bodies still tense but no longer trembling from the cold. The smaller one had curled up tight, nose tucked under its tail. The bigger wolf stayed alert, eyes half-lidded, but still watching every movement Warren made. Warren didn't try to get too close. He sat nearby in his old wooden chair, sipping the last of his tea, letting the warmth from the fire spread through the room. He flipped through an old paperback novel, barely reading, his attention drifting back to the wolves again and again. He couldn't stop thinking about how thin they were, their ribs, their rough coats, the way the smaller one limped when it moved. Something inside him tightened at the thought of how far they must have traveled in that condition. Whatever had pushed them to his doorstep had to be extreme. As the night wore on, he got up and pulled together a few more blankets. He arranged them in a quiet corner near the fire, hoping it might give the wolves more comfort. When he stepped back, they both looked up, not with fear, more like cautious curiosity. Slowly they rose and padded over, sniffing at the bedding before finally lying down again. The smaller wolf let out a sigh, almost human in its relief. Warren took that as a good sign. They weren't just accepting his space, they were starting to trust it. He double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, more out of habit than worry. The idea of danger still lingered in the back of his mind. These were still wild animals, but something about their behavior told him they meant no harm. They hadn't growled once, hadn't snapped. They were just tired, hurt, and holding on to whatever hope they could find. As he prepared to sleep, Warren paused by the fire one last time. He looked at the wolves, now dozing, breathing in slow, even rhythms. They looked peaceful, finally, as if the long journey, the fear, the cold, all of it had lifted for a little while. He turned off the lights and crawled into bed, whispering a quiet wish into the dark, that the night would stay calm, that this fragile moment of trust wouldn't break. And as sleep claimed him, the cabin stayed quiet, filled only with the soft breathing of man and beast, a strange, silent agreement between two worlds that had somehow found a shared warmth. Morning came with a pale light slipping through the frosted windows. Warren stirred from sleep, the cabin still warm from the fire. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But then he sat up and looked across the room. The wolves were still there. They were awake but quiet. The larger one sat upright, alert, its gaze fixed on him. The smaller one was curled tightly, and Warren noticed its limp looked worse than before. Concern filled him. Maybe the cold had made the injury swell. Maybe it had gotten worse overnight. He moved slowly, not wanting to startle them, and knelt near the blankets. The smaller wolf watched him, its ears twitching, but it didn't move away. Carefully, Warren reached out, palm open. The wolf didn't flinch. It just stared, eyes filled with something that almost looked like trust. Gently, he touched the injured leg. The wolf gave a soft growl, but it didn't snap. Warren felt the swelling right away. The leg was warm to the touch, the joint tender. Could be an old injury made worse by the cold or travel. He didn't know much about veterinary care, but he wasn't going to just ignore it. "I'll do what I can," he said softly, as if the wolf might understand. He stood and grabbed his old first aid kit from a cabinet. It wasn't much, just the basics left over from camping trips and Boy Scout days, but it was something. He brought it over, kneeling again beside the injured wolf, moving slow and calm, speaking in a low voice. "Easy, I'm just going to clean it." The larger wolf stood a few feet away, watching his every move, body tense. Warren glanced up at it, offering a quiet nod. "I'm helping," he murmured. He started by cleaning the leg gently, using a cotton swab and antiseptic. The wolf whimpered, shifting slightly, but didn't pull away. The cut wasn't deep, but the tissue around it was inflamed. Warren guessed it had been walking on it for too long, maybe with frostbite setting in. Carefully, he applied ointment and wrapped it in gauze, trying not to cause more pain. The wolf exhaled loudly when he finished, a sound somewhere between a sigh and a whine. Warren sat back, wiping his hands and letting out a breath of his own. "That's the best I can do for now." He watched as the wolf slowly lowered its head onto its paws. The larger one paced a few steps, before finally lying down again beside its sibling, close but not touching, a protective presence. Warren stood and moved away, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now, the wolves were safe, fed and warm, and maybe, just maybe, they knew he was trying to help. Later that morning, Warren took stock of what food he had left. The wolves had eaten most of the meat he'd set aside the night before, and though he still had a modest supply in the pantry, it wouldn't last long. Not with 2 extra mouths to feed. He rummaged through shelves, mentally calculating what could be spared. They'd need more if they were going to stay for even a few days. He grabbed another portion of meat and set it out on a plate, placing it on the floor near the fire. The wolves approached slowly, their steps cautious but not fearful. The smaller one moved stiffly, but the bandage seemed to help. So they ate quietly, side by side, like they had done it 100 times before. Warren stood nearby, arms folded, watching them. It still amazed him how natural this had started to feel. These wild animals in his home, eating his food, sleeping by his fire. He didn't feel afraid anymore. If anything, he felt responsible. After the meal, the wolves curled up on the blankets again, clearly exhausted. Warren let them rest and turned his attention to practical things. He added more wood to the fire, checked the weather outside, then pulled on his coat and gloves. He'd need to restock his firewood pile before the next storm hit, and maybe, if he was lucky, find signs of game nearby. Before stepping out, he looked back at the wolves. They were watching him, calm but alert. "I'll be back soon," he said quietly, almost surprised by how much he meant it. The cold outside hit hard. Snow covered everything, turning the land into a sea of white. Warren trudged through the knee-deep drifts toward his woodpile. He worked quickly, stacking logs onto a sled and pulling it back toward the cabin. Each trip reminded him how harsh life out here really was, how dangerous it could be to anyone not strong enough to face it. He paused near the tree line, scanning the area. A part of him kept wondering, were those two wolves alone? Were they outcasts? Or had they become separated from a pack? What if others were nearby? Or worse, what if someone came looking for them? Warren shook the thought from his head. One step at a time. When he returned to the cabin, the wolves were right where he'd left them, resting near the hearth. The smaller one had its head lifted, eyes following him as he walked through the door. The larger wolf gave a soft grunt, more acknowledgement than alarm. He unloaded the wood and stoked the fire, rubbing his hands near the heat. Then he brought out more food, using what little meat he had left that didn't require cooking. The wolves were hungry, but more patient this time, waiting until he set the plate down and stepped back. Warren sat in his chair and watched them eat again, this time not with worry, but with something closer to awe. Here they were, two wild creatures who, against every instinct, had chosen to trust a human. He didn't speak much that evening. There wasn't a need. The fire spoke for him. So did the quiet breathing of the wolves, the way they occasionally shifted on the blankets, and the deep stillness that settled over the cabin as night fell. He knew this moment couldn't last forever, but for now it was enough. Stay tuned for part 2 of this story. Subscribe our channel and press bell icon so that you get alert for our latest video.